Okay, so at this point, I want to talk for a second about middleware. So middleware is a concept that's used in Node that basically it's a function or a process that runs between processes. So let's say you send a request or you're receiving a response. You can put middleware between that to check for a value, make sure something exists, check authentication, that kind of thing. So if it passes that, then you can send it to the next function, or the next action in the stack, and so on. So it's kind of like a chain of this synchronous process one by one. So a couple of pieces of middleware that we're going to use here are cores and helmet. So we'll install those two, and then we'll want to import them. And the way that we use them, simple enough. We say server.use cores, and we'll invoke it, and server.use helmet. So let's see here, cores, cross-origin resource sharing, is a mechanism that allows restricted resources on a web page to be requested from another domain outside the domain from which the first resource was served. So basically, this allows us to share restricted resources across the web in a safe manner. And then we'll look here at Helmet. Helmet helps you secure your Express apps by setting various HTTP headers. It's not a silver bullet, but it can help. So these are just two that we use just for security as we're exchanging requests and responses across the web. And finally, for right now, we want to use a third piece of middleware called Express, if I can type, .json. And what this does is it parses requests into JSON format. If you don't do this, then you're going to run into problems, because if you're sending in your request body in JSON format, then you have to explicitly say here in your server, like, okay, parse this as JSON. And really quickly too, I just want you to notice here how I'm putting these ahead of my actual endpoints, right? If I put these below here, this would not have access to it. So it reads top to bottom and it runs these in sequence, right? So you have to put it ahead of it so that your endpoints will actually have access to it. Okay, so while we're here, before we get too far, let's go ahead and set up our script for NodeMon. So we'll say, let's name this start. We'll say NodeMon index.js. So this runs Node with NodeMon. Let's test if that works. So we'll say npm run start. Okay, so we have our server running, and we see we have NodeMon here. And then if we change anything, so let's add some, save it, see it automatically restarts. So this is super convenient when you're developing. And finally, what we really want to do here is we don't want to have our actual server declaration in our index.js. Our index.js is kind of our home import place, right? It's where we import our Node application into. So really what we want to do is declare a server file that holds all of this. It'll contain all of our middleware for that server, all our declarations, our endpoints, etc. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this out before we get too far. And what I like to do is create a folder called API. We'll create a new file in here called server.js. And some of this stuff we want to leave, but we want to take all of this over here. We want this over here. and we want this over here. Okay, we need to make sure that we import this. Well, server equals require. Okay, getting some errors, that's okay, but you might have guessed it because we have not exported it here. Okay, seem to be working well there. So at this point, what we want to do is we want to move forward, and we actually want to create all of our endpoints, right? At least a placeholder until we've gotten our database set up, but we'll do that later. So starting here, we have a basic server.get. Then so what we'll do is we'll declare a /todos route. You know, sometimes I love that predictive, suggestive thing, but sometimes it gets on my nerves, man. Okay, so this will be get all to-dos. Server.post /todos. Post a to-do. And I'm going to copy this because it's basically all the same here. Say put so post is like create a new one, put is update, and delete is delete. We'll just say here update a to-do, delete a to-do. So we kind of got our framework laid out here. And one thing I'd like to talk about is when we post, we just want to post into the to-dos route, right? But when we update or when we delete, we need to find a specific to-do message to update or delete, right? And what we need to do is actually pass through here the ID, right? We need to give it a piece of identifying data so we can actually go in and find the correct one to perform the action on. And so what you can do is when you declare your actual route here, you can use a colon syntax, and node knows, express knows, whatever comes after that colon is a variable. So it looks like this. So you say /:ID. Okay. So then whatever we pass through in the URL here after to-dos / is the ID. Okay. And then we can actually do something with that. So we'll do the same thing here, okay? And we'll come back to this. I'll go back over this. You know, it'll make more sense whenever we get to it. But for now, just know that we're going to need to pass through the ID in this way. Okay, so I went on and created some test data here. So it's just set up like this. You can just do an unnamed export here of some test data, and this is how we'll kind of vet if our endpoints are working before we actually build our database. So let's import that here. Oh, we need to go out. Okay, and then we can say here, response.json test data. And let's see, I spelled it wrong here. Okay. Okay, here's where we can go into Insomnia. We'll just create a basic get route. And we'll update this to 8888/todos. Send, and there we go. That's awesome. First try. Love that. Love to see that. Okay, we're going to continue. We're going to continue this, and we're going to try to build some logic out for each of the remaining endpoints.
Okay, so we got some really useful middleware imported, and we're utilizing that. We got some test data created, and we've started learning how to use Insomnia a little bit. We've tested our first endpoint, and it seems to be working nicely. Got NodeMon set up so we can actually develop here and not have to refresh our server every time we make a change. And so on the next video, we'll come back and actually test out those remaining 3 endpoints of our post, put, and delete. So I will see you in the next video.